You're listening to Simply the Best Sports Take, the best podcast breaking down the best stuff in sports with host Sean Bingham. His takes are so good, he'd drop the mic, but then you wouldn't be able to hear him, and that would suck.
Welcome in again to STB Sports Take. I am Sean Bingham, your host, and today we are talking about the greatest point guards and shooting guards in the history of the NBA. Following up on last week's talk with Craig Bolerjack and responding to the ESPN Top 100 and all the many mistakes they had in there. So we're going to bring in a couple of basketball experts to help us out today. One of them is Drew Pearson, a good friend of mine, been covering basketball for 25 years. The other one is Colin Terry, who's done both player development and scouting for the NBA. Tons of basketball knowledge and experience. We're going to get his insight as well. Let's just go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the point guards. Magic Johnson, to me, is the greatest point guard of all time. I don't think there's any question. I don't think anybody else even compares. I think John Stockton's right behind him at number 2. But Magic, to me, is just undoubtedly the greatest point guard the league has ever seen. The flair, the finesse, the charisma, the size. I mean, he was 6'9", playing point guard, but he had handles of guys that were 6'1". He played 13 seasons, won 5 titles, went to 4 others, so he was 5-4 in the finals. 13 for 13 on making the playoffs in his career. That's pretty impressive. League MVP 3 times, Finals MVP 3 times, 9 times. That's a recurring theme here. 9 times was the All-NBA first team selection. Never did make the all-defensive team, but as I'm looking on this list, I made a short list for point guards. The guys that made the list: Magic Johnson, John Stockton, in no particular order after this, Chris Paul, Steve Nash, Oscar Robertson, Isaiah Thomas, Steph Curry, Jason Kidd. Those are the guys I put on my short list. That's the top 8. I don't necessarily think Steph Curry even makes the top 8, if I'm being honest. I only put him in here because I dug deep into the stats of each of these guys, and I know that Steph Curry is somebody that's loved right now, and he's a maniac right now. So I had my producers do some really intense research. So shout out to Phil Hyatt and Johnny Spock, the producers of STB Sports Take, Simply the Best Sports Podcast. Those guys are studs, and they did some fantastic research. So we've got all the stuff right here in front of us to prove why we're right and everyone else is wrong. So on the short list again, Oscar Robertson, Magic Johnson, John Stockton, Steph Curry, Steve Nash, Chris Paul, Isaiah Thomas, Jason Kidd. Those are the 8 that we looked at. Anyone outside of those 8, I don't think has an argument to be one of the top 2 of all time. Probably not even the top 3 or 4. You could start to make arguments, around the 6 or 7 mark. Who's the 6th and 7th best point guards of all time? Bob Cousy, we didn't put in the list, but that's because the highlights I've seen of him are him dribbling with his right hand while going left. So he was probably pretty good at his time. I don't think he'd stack up against these guys, though. So no offense to Bob Cousy for all you old-timers out there listening. We love you. So John Stockton, to me, would be probably the backup. But I want to get into, the defensive stuff that we were just talking about with Magic Johnson not being on the all-defensive team. That sounds like a bad thing, but as I look at this short list, the only guys that have made the first team all-defensive team are Chris Paul, who did it 5 times, and Jason Kidd, who did it 4. Chris Paul is still playing, and he may still likely make that team a couple of times. But Nash, Curry, Stockton, Isaiah Thomas, Magic, and Oscar Robertson never made that team. But John Stockton absolutely should have. John Stockton is the all-time steals leader. You're telling me the all-time steals leader not one time made the all-defensive first team? That seems kind of like a mistake, I guess. But so those are the guys. So if you look at let's look at Steph Curry. Let's compare him to guys like the guys I've got him right next to here are Steve Nash and Isaiah Thomas. Steve Nash, probably the most overrated MVP in the history of the league. Steve Nash won 2 MVP awards, and I don't know how he did it because he was a great player, but MVP means you were the very best player. And those are years that like Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and even LeBron James were in the league and playing great. 2005, 2006, Dwyane Wade won a championship in 2006. So I'm kind of surprised that Steve Nash won 2, but he did it, so good for him. 3 times on the All-NBA first team, and didn't win Rookie of the Year, never went to the finals, went to the playoffs 12 times. 5 assist titles, that was his biggest accomplishment. 14.3 points per game for his career, 8.5 assists. He did shoot 43% from 3, pretty impressive for Steve Nash. 49% from the field. Steph Curry, 44% from 3, the best of any of these guys on here, followed by Nash, followed by Stockton, followed by Chris Paul, and then Jason Kidd, Magic Johnson, and dead last is Isaiah Thomas at 29. Oscar Robertson, there was no three-point line, so his stats obviously don't exist for that category. So on my short list of guards, I'm going to have to say I'm taking Magic and Stockton. And if I were to rate after that to get into a top 5, I'd put Oscar Robertson at number 3. Oscar Robertson was league MVP once. And of the guys on this list, Magic won it 3 times, Nash twice, Curry once, Big O once. The other guys never won it. Isaiah Thomas maybe should have, but he played in the Bird, Magic, Jordan era, so can't really fault him for that. Rookie of the Year, Jason Kidd, Chris Paul, and Oscar Robertson won it. Guys that have titles, obviously Magic has 5, Isaiah has 2, and then Kidd, Curry, and Big O each have 1. Kids, of course, did come with that Mavericks team that beat the Heat in 2011. He was not as big of a factor in those years as he was earlier in his career, but he still was a pretty integral part of the team and did win that title. So getting back to Big O, 12-time All-Star, 3 All-Star game MVP awards, most of anyone on this list. He also averaged the most points of anyone on the list, averaged the most rebounds of anyone on the list. But he was 4th in assists. First was Magic, second Stockton, third Chris Paul, and then Big O was 4th. But Big O leading the way for these point guards with points per game and rebounds per game and All-Star MVPs, All-Star appearances. Only one to win Rookie of the Year. 11th all-time in points, highest on the list of anyone on this in the point guard category here. So Big O comes in at number 3. The reason I put Stockton ahead of him, which is tough, it is tough, as we read the numbers, and now you're thinking Big O should be ahead of Stockton. Wow, that sounds impressive. And it is, but Stockton, this is crazy. Stockton made the playoffs 19 times out of 19 tries. Every single year he made the playoffs. He went to the finals twice, lost both times, in 6 games both times, to Jordan and the Bulls both times. But he was an amazing player, one of the best passers we've ever seen. He's the all-time steals leader in NBA history, the all-time assist leader in NBA history. That's really, really tough to beat. He was All-NBA first team 3 or 4 times. Let me see here. All-NBA first team twice. 9 assist titles, 9 years in a row, and 2 steals titles. He averaged 13.1 and 10.5 for his career. Shot 51.5% from the field. The only guy on this list to shoot over 50% from the field for his career, other than Magic, who shot 52. So it's really close between those 3, Magic, Stockton, and Oscar Robertson, when you just look at pure numbers. But when you dig into the intangibles, Magic, to me takes the cake by far. And then I would say Stockton number 2, the Big O number 3. And I'd have to give it to Isaiah Thomas at number 4. And after that, it gets really hazy. Steph Curry, Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, Chris Paul. I'd probably put Steve Nash 8th out of these 8. Curry is tough because Curry is so good right now. Like what he did last year and what he's doing this year are things that we've never seen before. If he can keep it up, then yeah, he ends up in the top 3 or 4 point guards ever. But like I said last week on the show, he hasn't done it yet. He hasn't earned it yet. He hasn't done enough. You know, what happens if he gets hurt tomorrow? So I just can't put Steph Curry that high on the list. But if I'm being honest, I would take him over Nash. Kidd got the title. Chris Paul hasn't done a whole lot more than Curry has, but he's been doing it for 4 more seasons. So maybe I'd put Paul ahead of Curry and Kidd ahead of Paul, because Kidd played 19 seasons, went to the playoffs 17 times, went to 3 NBA finals, won one of them, did get Rookie of the Year, 5 times All-NBA first-team selection, which is actually the second most on this list. It's actually the third most behind Oscar Robertson and Magic, who each got 9. Paul had 4, and then Steve Nash 3, Stockton and Isaiah 2, and then Curry with just 1. So that's another reason Curry can't be, so high all time. He's only once has he been considered the best point guard in the league for that season, which was last year. He'll probably get it again this year, though. So I'd put, again, I'm going to say Magic Johnson, John Stockton, Oscar Robertson, Isaiah Thomas, Jason Kidd, Chris Paul, Steph Curry, Steve Nash. That would be my order 1 through 8 for the point guards. So let's take a look now at the shooting guards. And by the way, send me a tweet at Sean Bingham, SeanBingham, at Sean Bingham on Twitter. I want to hear what you think. Who are your top point guards? So tweet me at Sean Bingham. Let's look at the shooting guards now. Anyone that doesn't have Jordan as their number 1 shooting guard of all time deserves to be shot themselves. Not really. But Michael Jordan is far and away the greatest player this game has ever seen. He literally robbed championships from people all over the place. Hakeem Olajuwon was the one guy. Drexler was able to, who made my short list, by the way, of shooting guards. Drexler got in on that action as well, where it was like, hey, Jordan's playing baseball. Hurry, everybody, let's get a championship. The Rockets got both of them. So Jordan is for sure the greatest there ever was. And if we're just looking at this short list, the guys who made the short list along with Michael, like I said, Clyde Drexler, one of them, Jerry West, Kobe Bryant, and Dwyane Wade. I'm a huge Dwyane Wade fan. I think Dwyane Wade's top 5 years are among the best the league has ever seen. He just kind of tapered off a little bit these last few years, and then he was somewhat overshadowed by LeBron. I'd say it was probably the most equal 1-2 punch that we've ever seen out of a championship team. Usually there's a very clear-cut Jordan or Magic, but this was like LeBron and Wade were both getting 20-plus a game. They were taking turns who was leading the team in scoring. And if you ask me, if they had gone to Wade against the Mavericks in that first championship that they lost in 2011, I actually think that D-Wade probably takes them to victory. In 2006, Dwyane Wade had the best finals performance maybe ever. And that's coming from a diehard Michael Jordan fan and a big-time Michael Jordan believer. Dwyane Wade against the Mavericks in the 2011 finals, the Heat were down 0-2 and getting their butts kicked in Game 3, and Dwyane Wade single-handedly brought that team back, scoring 40 a game, 4 games straight. And the Heat won in 6 after being down 0-2 and getting creamed in Game 3. The Heat came back. D-Wade was clutch and was Finals MVP that year in 2006. Got the scoring title in 2009. He's a 3-time champion. Went to the Finals 5 times. 10 out of 13 years of his career, he's made the playoffs. 12 All-Star appearances. All-Star MVP once. All-NBA first team twice. And never made the all-defensive team. That actually surprises me. He never made the first team for all-defense. 9 times for Michael Jordan, 9 times for Kobe Bryant, 4 times for Jerry West. Clyde Drexler and Dwyane Wade never made that first all-defensive team. First all-NBA team, Kobe with the most on this list, with 11, Jordan 10, Jerry West 10, and Drexler with 1. What's interesting about Jordan, though, is that only 1 full season didn't result in him being on the first All-NBA team. Only 1, which had to have been his rookie year, because he played 15 seasons. We're not going to count those 2 with the Wizards, okay? So get rid of those 2. And then he had the season where he came back out of his first retirement and only played 17 games or so. So that season doesn't count because he couldn't have made it that year. And then his second year in the league, he was injured. So 4 of his 15 years that he played honestly don't really even fully count, because 2 of them were he played less than a fourth of the season. And then the last 2, he was 40 years old playing for the Wizards. And even then, he averaged over 20 points a game each of those 2 seasons with the Wizards in his late 30s. And I think he even turned 40 at that time. So you got to wonder, if Jordan had never retired that first time to go play baseball, would he have won 8 championships in a row? Was anyone going to stop those Bulls? Because they won 3 straight, were pretty good without him. They made the playoffs at least and stuff. But then when he came back, they won 3 straight again. So it's like, could the Bulls have won 8 championships in a row in the 90s? I mean, that would have been absolutely incredible. So Jordan is unprecedented, the number one without question. 3 steals titles for Jordan, 9 times on the all-defensive team. The only guy on this list with a steals title. So if I'm going to rank these guys, I'm saying Michael Jordan number 1, Kobe Bryant number 2, Dwyane Wade number 3, Jerry West number 4, Clyde Drexler number 5. Those would be my 5 top shooting guards of all time. Allen Iverson's an interesting one. He was kind of a point guard, shooting guard combo. He's more exciting than some of these guys, but he never won a title. All of these guys got at least one. And you know what's interesting about Jerry West? Jerry West got a title, and he got a Finals MVP, but his Finals MVP was in 1969, and his championship was in 1972. So he actually got a Finals MVP in a year that the Lakers lost the NBA Finals. The only guy to ever win the Finals MVP on the losing team. LeBron probably should have gotten it last year, but I think they just decided they weren't going to do that anymore. That was the first year they ever gave out the Finals MVP award, 1969, and Jerry West won it even though the Lakers lost the Finals that year. Kind of an interesting fact. But AI was a guy that was so quick, 6'1", and could dunk on guys. Super exciting to watch, but never won a title. Did take the Sixers to the finals one year against the Lakers where he stepped over Tyronn Lue. But you can't really, I don't think I could put him in the all-time list with these guys, especially since he wasn't necessarily a true 2 guard. He was more of a point guard. So that would be my list: Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwyane Wade, Jerry West, Clyde Drexler. Again, though, send me your tweets at Sean Bingham on Twitter. I want to hear who your top shooting guards are of all time. All right, and with that, we'd like to welcome in a very good friend of mine, a former high school basketball teammate who I believe averaged more points than I did minutes per game. Drew Pearson is with us. Drew, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Drew, we're talking about the all-time greats in the NBA. I know you are a diehard basketball fan. You've been following your whole life. So we want to talk specifically about point guards. I know you grew up in Utah. Where does John Stockton rank? He's a guy with 0 championships, but he is the all-time steals leader. He is the all-time assist leader. Where does he stack up against the all-time point guards?
Yeah, I think he's got to be in any conversation that you talk about top guys. He's got to fit in the top 5 for sure. I personally would love to put him at number 1. I don't know if you look at his career stats and say what he accomplished over his career, I think he can justify that. If you look at his peak performance, maybe his best year versus a guy like Magic Johnson would probably get the nod. But if you're looking for longevity and those type of things, I think he's in the conversation for number 1 for sure.
So, for guys like you and me, we didn't have I've seen Oscar Robertson highlights. I've seen Bob Cousy highlights, but I never saw them play. I mean, how do you think, just totally speculating, how would those guys do in today's game? Because I feel like Bob Cousy would have guys running circles around him. I don't know, though.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. Old Bob Cousy, hard to imagine that he could keep up with an Allen Iverson or, some of these other guards just with the height and everything else. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure the Bob Cousy highlights I've seen, he's driving left, dribbling with his right hand. So
yeah, if you could go around your back then, you were pretty impressive.
So what's interesting, we've kind of gone through this ESPN list. That's what inspired, some of this talk. Steph Curry was ranked the number 4 point guard of all time on that list. Does that seem premature to you? Where would you rank Steph Curry? I know he's having a fantastic year right on the heels of a phenomenal year last year as well. But where does he stack up against guys like Magic and the Big O and Stockton and Isaiah Thomas? Like, where does Curry really stand with those guys?
Yeah, in my opinion, he's got a chance to be in that conversation, but right now I have a hard time putting him there. Again, if you're talking about peak performance this year, he's putting on a show that very few ever have. But you're talking a guy who's, maybe been to the All-Star game 2 or 3 times. He does have a championship. I'll give him that. But, I think it takes, when you're talking about all-time greats, you can't be a flash in the pan. And if he goes down with an ACL injury, next week, that's
Great point.
what he could end up being. So,
great point. I mean, would we have said this about Derrick Rose 2 seasons ago? And I mean, nobody would put him in the all-time greats.
Yeah.
Now.
He won't even crack he won't even crack his list.
Yeah.
And we would have said that about him after his MVP season. He would have been right where Steph Curry is right now, probably.
Great point. So let's move to shooting guards real quick. I mean, obviously you've got MJ there. Is there any question he's number 1 for shooting guards? Is there somebody that could challenge him?
No.
Okay.
There just isn't. I wish there was, because he shoved off on Byron Russell, but but there's not. There's no debating on who the best shooting guard ever was.
So what's interesting is that I agree with you. To me, there's like no question it's Michael Jordan. But then the debate does become kind of fun for who's number 2. On my personal list, I've got guys like Kobe Bryant, Jerry West, Dwyane Wade, Clyde Drexler. Who makes your short list there, on the heels of Jordan?
Yeah, you've got Kobe, obviously in modern day. And I'm not really sure who else. I mean, those 2 obviously stand out in our lifetime as number 1 and number 2. I have a hard time moving anybody up above that. But you even got like a Dwyane Wade. James Harden's going to put out some crazy career stats. I don't think that he'll ever be on a top 5 because he doesn't know how to pass the ball. But
Yeah.
He can choose for it.
Let me ask you this: so if you're say we're in a different time and you've got the ability to pick Dwyane Wade or James Harden in their prime, who are you picking?
Wade.
Okay. Yeah, me too. What about Kobe and Wade?
Kobe.
So how much emphasis do you personally put on championships, and how fair is it, for certain guys like a John Stockton to not, they don't have that championship. So does that really diminish their entire career? Or because, Wade's got 3, but he definitely had some solid players around him. He had Shaq for 1, and then he had, of course, LeBron and Bosh for the other 2. Kobe had Shaq, and he had Pau Gasol. But how much emphasis should be put on championships?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I think a lot should, because some guys, they just find a way to win. And that's where I think Kobe kind of separates himself from a lot of guys, is he had Shaq for the first ones, and he maybe knew it too and said, hey, I don't want people to say that about me, and demanded that trade back in, I don't know when it was, 07 maybe, and tried to get out of LA and ended up trading Shaq instead, and went through some growing pains, and he won some more as the alpha dog. So he's definitely proven that. And Jordan, what separates him is he's a winner. I mean, yes, he had crazy good numbers and, everything else, but what really makes him go down as the GOAT is the fact that he just won and won and won. Something that I've always, as a Jazz fan, I always look at and say, how did we have 2 top, 10 to 15 players in Malone and Stockton, a top 10 coach in the history of the league, everybody says, and we won 0 championships. That's kind of hard to swallow from a fan perspective. You want to say it, and they were super consistent for a super long time, but they obviously didn't have that, peak performance. Even when Jordan was left the league for a couple of years, they couldn't pull it off.
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting. Jordan definitely robbed several of the all-time greats of titles.
Yep.
Guys like Stockton and Malone, Patrick Ewing. You wonder how many of those guys, Charles Barkley. You wonder how many of those guys would have gotten titles if Jordan had taken all of them himself.
Yeah, there would have been a lot more parity in the league if he wasn't in it.
So all-time backcourt, who you taking? Are you going to take Magic or Stockton? Are you going to take? It sounds like you're taking MJ. Who are you taking at your point, though? If you're picking a team right now.
Yeah, a lot of it's going to be based on system. I personally would run a system that would have John Stockton running it.
I like that.
Depending on how many how many other great players you can throw in there. But when you're talking about an all-time great team, I think a guy like John, even though he couldn't score like Magic, is who you'd want distributing the ball. There's only so many shots to go around.
Yeah, so we look at, I've got Stockton and Magic's numbers side by side here. So Stockton, you know what's weird about Stockton? The guy is the all-time steals leader in NBA history. Not one time did he ever make the all-defense first team. That's crazy. That seems like a travesty. So Stockton, Magic averaged just shy of 20 a game, Stockton 13. Assists, they were pretty even. Magic 11, Stockton 10.5. And then, of course, Magic with more rebounds, but Stockton with about the same amount of steals. Their field goal percentage, 52 to 51.5. Magic with a slight edge. 3-point shooting, though, Stockton had a pretty significant advantage, shooting 39% from three, and Magic only 30% from three. So definitely Stockton was a facilitator, a pass-first kind of guy. So who are you going to have backing those guys up? You've got your schoolyard pick. You've now got Jordan and Stockton starting. Who's coming off the bench to spell those guys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you could have a Magic Johnson coming off the bench as a scoring point guard, that wouldn't hurt. Another guard that I think maybe gets left a little too far down the list if you talk about peak performance years is Isaiah Thomas. In his peak, he didn't have the longevity. I think he had a 9-year career and was really great for probably 6 of them. But there were a couple of years where he would, Steve Nash won a couple MVPs, and I don't know that he did what Isaiah did in his peak years.
No, I don't think he did
carrying
at all.
his team to championships. So I think he's an underrated one that I would love to have on my team also, just because I feel like he had that Jordan competitive, want to win edge and, do whatever it takes. And then, at the shooting guard, Kobe would be a great pick. An older Kobe, one that went to the Olympics and was willing to, defer a little bit more often.
Yeah. So it's an interesting point you bring up about Isaiah Thomas. The guy won 2 titles, went to 3, never won an MVP. He did win the finals MVP in one of those championship runs. But that just kind of made me think about today's game a little bit. A guy that just is a freak of nature, in my opinion, is Russell Westbrook. What kind of potential does he have? Does he have potential to make this list if he stays where he's at for a few years, or is he? To me, you could even argue that he's better than Steph Curry. He's just in a different system that doesn't allow him to do the things that Steph Curry's allowed to do.
Yeah, I mean, he can't shoot the ball like Steph, but everything, and maybe his handle is a little bit less, but everything else, he's superior. Athleticism. I mean, from a coach's standpoint, you just look at his physical abilities and drool. That guy can jump out of the gym. When he got drafted, I remember actually being just baffled and almost upset at the NBA system. Here's a guy who backed up Darren Collison in college. Yeah, they went to the Final Four, but he's a 6th man. He doesn't even start in college, and I think he went number 3.
Yeah.
But man, you can sure see why now. He's unstoppable. I mean, when you talk about you can't guard certain guys, you cannot guard him. If he's hitting that little 15-foot pull-up, he's unguardable. As far as I'm concerned, as far as just pure one-on-one basketball, him and LeBron James are at the top of an all-time great list, top 5, both of them.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Drew, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.
So there you have it. He's taking John Stockton ahead of Magic Johnson, but then he is taking Jordan and then Kobe backing him up. That's pretty good. I can get with that, especially when he says the system. He wants to run a system that fits with the other players, and Stockton was definitely a pass-first guy, the ultimate pass-first guy in the history of the league, the all-time assist leader, probably a record that will never be broken. And, like Drew said, there's only so many shots to go around. So Stockton's a guy that doesn't mind not taking shots. So I kind of don't mind that pick. I would take Magic, but I like that pick. Quick little fact correction there. He said that Isaiah, he thought, played only 9 seasons. Isaiah Thomas played 13 seasons. And then another thing, he said that he thought Russell Westbrook was drafted third. I wasn't sure, so we looked that up just real quick. He was drafted 4th overall in 2008 by the Supersonics. So pretty good off the top of your head memory by Drew. But Russell Westbrook did indeed back up Darren Collison. He was drafted 4th overall. Let's turn now, though, to a guy with a ton of experience in both scouting and player development at the professional level. And with that, we welcome in Colin Terry. Colin has done some scouting for the NBA. He's also done a bunch of development with both NBA and college players. This guy knows as much about basketball as anyone you're ever going to meet. Colin, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're stoked to talk about this. Today, as you know, we're talking about the all-time great guards in NBA history. But before we get to that, I got to ask you a question that I know our listeners are going to like to hear your answer on, or not like maybe. And that is about Jimmer Fredette. He's back in the NBA, got a 7th chance or whatever this is now. Talk to us about Jimmer Fredette. Does he have a place in the NBA? What's going to happen with him?
Sean, that's a great question. I think Jimmer will be in the NBA for about the 10-day contract. With regard to the NBA, the toughest thing with him with regards to his situation is lack of athleticism, lack of defense. He's got with regard to the NBA and the NBA circle, his inability to play defense, and he's kind of a matchup nightmare. Any good NBA team is if he's in the game, is going to look for ways to put him in a pick and roll, post him up on the block, and create a double team situation. And if you're an NBA team and you can create a defensive double team, it opens up a lot of doors for the offense and a lot of open shots. And
now, for us Jimmer fans, for those of us that are still drinking the BYU Kool-Aid, aren't there plenty of guys in the league? I mean, is Steph Curry like a phenomenal defender? He's MVP last year. He's going to get it again this year. I mean, is he known as being a phenomenal defender? I feel like he's not. And I feel like James Harden, does he even know what defense is? But he's MVP candidate year in and year out. I mean, how important is defense at the guard position if you can score?
Well, and that's a great point. I think you're right to a certain extent with regards to Steph Curry and James Harden. I think you look at Steph Curry. Does he ever guard Russell Westbrook when they go head to head?
No,
he never does.
No,
never does, because he'd get eaten alive. James Harden generally is not guarding the best shooting guard or what have you when they're playing their team that they're playing against. So I don't disagree with that. The challenge is, though, is both of those guys have proven in the NBA that they can create their own shot against pretty much anybody.
Yeah.
And Jimmer, whether you could call it lack of opportunity or inability, and I think it's a combination of the two, but probably more so inability at that level to create your own shot and score. Those athletes, the leap from college to the NBA is just tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to create your own shot at BYU, playing against, some West Coast Conference teams and things like that is completely different than creating your shot on a night-in, night-out basis in the NBA against some of the best athletes in the world.
True. I mean, granted, BYU isn't in a power conference. At the time when Jimmer was there, they were still in the Mountain West, and they were actually ranked pretty high, playing San Diego State. And Kawhi Leonard was actually one of the guys he matched up with. But I do see your point there. But real quick, I know we got to move on. But one thing I wanted, you and I were talking the other day, and you mentioned something about Kyle Collinsworth, and I think some BYU fans that love Jimmer and don't love what you just said about his future in the NBA might be interested to hear what you had to say to me about Kyle Collinsworth. Do you remember that conversation we had?
Yeah, I do. So, I think that Kyle Collinsworth has a better long-term NBA career potential than Jimmer does, for a couple of reasons. The first reason is he's 6'6". I think that's one of the things that hurts Jimmer is just pure genetics. He's not, he doesn't have the height and length that is a huge advantage to have as a player in the NBA. Whereas Kyle Collinsworth, he's got that 6'6" body. I haven't watched him a lot, but he looks like a decent athlete, which really helps at that level. And then the other thing that I think makes him valuable as an NBA player is his ability to do multiple things. He can pass. He gets a lot of assists. He can rebound.
He actually just broke the all-time BYU assists record the other night.
Yeah, and getting a triple-double in college is a really not only an impressive thing, but it's also a tough thing, just because of the way the game is played and the skill level now and things like that. And so I think the combination of him being 6'6", a decent athlete, being able to pass the ball, being able to rebound his position, which is really good, and to defend, I think it's a great combination. Whereas with Jimmer, when you think of Jimmer, you just think, okay, a good shooter, okay, but not really anything else. Whereas with Collinsworth, you have multiple aspects to his game.
That's a good point. Well, I guess time will tell. We'll see what happens with those guys. Let's move on now to the NBA, though, and something we've been discussing here on the show for a couple of episodes, just breaking down the all-time greats. It all kind of was inspired by the list that ESPN put out. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but we've kind of made our own short list. But I'm curious, if we just talk about point guards only, who makes your short list for top point guards of all time?
Definitely Magic Johnson. Magic, 6'9", pass the ball, score, pretty good defender. I think underrated defender as a guard with his position. Definitely John Stockton. I'm a big John Stockton guy. What he was able to do, that's one of the things. I think the BYU fans might not like me as much with my analysis with Jimmer, but with the Jazz fans may do. I mean, to be able to have a run in the NBA, of 15, 20 years where you're consistently, one of the top teams in the Western Conference, to me is actually more impressive than winning a championship. Because
really?
Just having that to have that long-term consistency, Sean, in the NBA. Look at all these teams that win a title or two, and then they're in rebuilding mode.
Yeah.
And you look at the Jazz, they had, I can't even remember, a 20-year run where they were.
Yeah, I've got it pulled up here. Stockton went to the playoffs every year of his career, 19 for 19.
Yeah, that's absolute. The only organization able to do that has been the San Antonio Spurs. And, to be able to be consistently competitive in a playoff team is tougher. And I've had conversations with general managers in the NBA about this. It's tougher to do than to win an NBA title because of the transition and free agency and how everything works. So definitely John Stockton's up there. I would put Isaiah Thomas, is probably number 3 on the list. He was just a competitor. Just wouldn't back down from anybody. Won a couple NBA championships, put up great numbers throughout his career. Very, very good. I am a little hesitant, with that list with regards to Chris Paul at this point. I like Chris Paul, but he hasn't won anything. In fact, I don't think he's even made it to the Western Conference Finals in his career.
So where would you stack up? If you put Chris Paul, because this is something I was debating on my own just a few moments ago. Steph Curry versus Chris Paul. I personally feel like I would put Chris Paul, if they were both to go down with injuries, heaven forbid, like today, and they both retire today, and we never see him play again. I have a hard time saying that Steph Curry had the better career. I know he got the one MVP and the one title, but he only went to the All-Star game 3 times. I mean, he's had 2 good seasons, really. He's in the midst of his 3rd right now,
Yeah, and that I agree with that. However, Steph Curry's shooting ability is arguably one of the greatest of all time. And
who do you think wins a 3-point shooting contest, Jimmer Fredette or Steph Curry?
Are you being serious right now? I think Steph Curry would beat him 9 times out of 10.
Okay, so Jimmer would win one.
And the one time
as long as we got you on the record saying that Jimmer would win one.
And I think the one time that Jimmer would win is because Steph injured his wrist or something by swishing too many in a row. But I think Steph Curry, with winning the NBA title, taking a franchise that was pretty much the laughingstock of the NBA for years, helping to turn that around. I mean, he's arguably right now kind of even revolutionizing the NBA game even more than some other guys that have come along and played and things like that, because of the shooting ability and the Warriors' ability to spread the floor. I mean, I was watching the Warriors play the other night, and I was watching them play, and I'm like, dude, I was asking myself, what's one guy on the floor that can't hit an open 3? I mean, they have that many shooters on that team. It's incredible.
They really do. Yeah, what they're doing is crazy. It's going to break my heart when they break the Bulls record of 72-10. I know they're going to do it, and it's going to disappoint me, but kudos to them.
You really think they're going to do it, huh?
I don't see. I mean, I guess they got to play the Spurs 3 more times, but I just don't see how they don't make it at this point. Like, there's 20-something games left is all. I mean, I don't see them losing 6 of their last 20. I just don't see that happening.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is, with regards to the Spurs, not to go on another tangent, but I think the Spurs have a decent chance of beating the Warriors in the playoffs. So that might be a whole nother topic for another day.
Yeah, we will save that one for another day, but they absolutely could. So, one question I want to ask you with regards to these lists that we're talking about: what makes greatness in your mind? That's something that I think that question and the various answers to that question is what causes so much debate, because a lot of guys, they just want to know the hard stats. Other guys, they want to know how many titles you won. Other guys take into account the clutch factor. For me, it's a combination of the 3, and I hate it when people just go off of stats, because if we just go off of stats, then maybe Wilt Chamberlain's the greatest ever. I don't know. The guy averaged 30 and 22 for his career. But, I mean, I wouldn't take him in my top 10 probably, honestly. So I'm just curious, to you, what makes true greatness?
I think the number one thing that I look for in a great player, the NBA coaches would say, and things like that as well, is the number one thing is, does he make his teammates better? There's a lot of good players in the NBA that put up great stats, but their teams never win. They barely go to the playoffs, if they even do that.
Carmelo Anthony.
And they don't and they don't make their teammates better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is maximizing your potential, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are more genetically gifted than other players. And so maximizing your potential, I mean, going back to John Stockton, John Stockton's not going to be somebody who's going to be, dunking it from the free throw line and things like that. But here's a guy that not only maximized his potential, but exceeded it, big time. I think Steve Nash also falls into that category as well. And then I think the last thing is, and I think this is one of the most overlooked things for an average fan, is he great in all aspects of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is a lot of fans think a guy scores 28 points in a game and he's a great player. Well, that same player didn't ever get run back on defense because he was too lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so his team is, constantly, there's 5 offensive players and 4 defensive defensive guys on his team, and they end up losing.
Yep.
Well, how can you be a great player if you're only committed to not only one aspect of the game, but one side of the ball? And so to me, a truly great player is committed to defense, to rebounding, to passing, to assists, to doing all those little things as well that are just critical. One of the things that we talk about too is, does the guy play winning basketball? And winning basketball is doing those little things, is being committed to things that don't necessarily even show up in the stat sheet. So I just think a combination of those 3 things is, to me, makes a guy an all-time great.
I like it. And that's really good insight, especially coming from you, where you've scouted these guys, you develop players, you've been involved in the game, and I like that. Who makes guys around them better? So I'm curious, if we move on to shooting guards, where do you put a guy? I mean, I'm sure Michael Jordan's going to be your top guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he's not, then we need to hang up now. No, I'm just teasing you. But where do you put a guy like Kobe Bryant on the list? Does he make guys around him better? I think you could argue that for part of his career, maybe not, but for most of it, probably yes. I don't know. What's your take, though?
So I would put Kobe at number 2.
Okay.
Michael, obviously the greatest of all time, and Michael being the greatest of all time because he did it all. I mean, he did everything, but
he did.
Yeah, I think Kobe Bryant had, a career transformation, a paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
He had those 3 titles with Shaquille O'Neal and the Los Angeles Lakers, things like that. And then he had some down years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it, kind of humbled him as much as he can be humbled, to the point where he realized that, you need help to win championships in the NBA.
Yeah.
And so I do think when they beat the Orlando Magic and the Boston Celtics, when Paul Gasol was out there, things like that, he won those 2 titles on his own. It forced him to learn how to develop teammates, not only, with their skills, help them that, but mental toughness to be able to win those tough playoff games on the road or whatever the situation may be. And so I do think he had that and did cultivate that through his career. So I would put him at number 2. The ESPN list puts Jerry West at number 3. I'm sure he was phenomenal. I never really saw him play. I heard a lot. It's hard to argue with the logo.
Yeah.
But I would probably put Dwyane Wade at 3.
Dude, we're on the same page here. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, I'd put Dwyane Wade at 3, just because here's a guy that had to fight for everything. He wasn't highly recruited out of high school at Marquette, and really had to fight and develop his game there. And I think his mental toughness is off the charts as well. So that's how I put my top 3.
I like it. Well, we're gonna come back to you in a few days and chat more about forwards. For now, we got to go. But thanks a ton for joining us, Colin. Great insight.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for today's podcast. Be sure and join us next week as we round out our team. You've got our backcourt. I'm taking MJ and Magic, backing them up. We've got Kobe and Stockton. We're going to talk small forwards, power forwards, and centers next week. We're going to round out an entire team of 15 guys, the top 15 dream team of all time. Please, again, subscribe to this podcast. We love you guys. Give us a good rating. Share it with your friends. Follow us on Twitter, at Sean Bingham, SeanBingham, and check us out on the interweb stbsportstake.com.
Thanks for hanging with Simply the Best Sports Take. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and check out stbsportstake.com. Simply the best in sports.
'Cause we